A family vanished on a lake trip in 1986. For 11 years, there was no sign of the Carsons. No boat, no bodies, not a single clue. Then, in the summer of 1997, a fisherman on Lake Whitney snagged something unexpected in his net, a sun-bleached boat, half buried in mud, and inside it, evidence that would finally reveal the truth about what happened to the Carson family. 11 years earlier, the Carson family had left their small house in Whitney, Texas, for what was supposed to be a perfect summer weekend on the lake. Steve and Linda Carson, along with their two kids, 13-year-old Emily and 10-year-old Matthew, packed their fishing gear, life jackets, and a cooler full of sandwiches. Steve, a local mechanic, had been talking for months about renting a small motorboat and showing the kids how to fish the real Texas way. The weather that Saturday morning was almost impossibly perfect, bright sun, not a cloud in the sky, and the lake sparkling in the warm light. Neighbors remembered waving goodbye as the Carsons backed out of their driveway. The family dog barked in the yard, and Linda promised to bring home catfish for dinner. No one who saw them that morning could have imagined they would never see the Carsons again. By Sunday evening, when Steve didn't show up for his Monday shift at the garage and Emily missed her summer camp bus, neighbors started to worry. The sheriff's office launched a massive search across Lake Whitney and the surrounding woods. Boats scoured the shoreline, helicopters swept over the water, and volunteers combed the trails, but they found nothing. No life jackets, no fishing poles, no sign of the boat. It was as if the entire family had vanished into thin air. In the years that followed, rumors flourished in Whitney. Some people whispered about accidents, others about foul play, and a few insisted the Carsons had run away to start a new life somewhere else. Their house stood empty, gathering dust and bad memories. But everything changed in the summer of 1997 when that battered old boat surfaced, and with it, the first real clues to the Carson family's fate. And as police and neighbors gathered at the lake, the old questions were asked again: what really happened to the Carsons that day? And could a single boat, forgotten at the bottom of Lake Whitney, hold the answers everyone had been searching for? In the days after the discovery of the Carson family's boat, Lake Whitney became the focus of statewide attention. News vans lined up along the gravel road by the shore, their antennas pointed skyward, and curious locals gathered in small, anxious clusters. For 11 years, the Carson mystery had haunted the town like a stubborn storm. Now, with the boat pulled from the lake's muddy bottom and cordoned off behind yellow tape, hope and dread returned in equal measure. Sheriff Don Malone, who had led the original search in 1986, stood quietly at the water's edge, his hands shoved deep in his pockets. Time had turned his hair silver, but the case had never faded from his mind. Now, with reporters shouting questions and the sun beating down, he found himself reliving every decision, every missed opportunity of that long-ago weekend. The fisherman who'd found the boat, Jake Landry, was still shaken as he described what happened. "I thought I'd caught a big catfish," he told police. "But my net got heavy, and when I hauled it in, it was tangled in something metal. I saw the old paint, the cracked hole, and I knew it had been down there a long time. Then I saw the name, Linda Lee, just barely visible on the bow. I remember the Carsons called their boat that." Police and forensic teams arrived within hours, carefully hauling the boat up onto the shore. The hole was battered, strewn with algae and mud. The seats inside were torn, and one of the oars was snapped clean in half. At the bottom of the boat, in a small storage compartment, they found a weathered red backpack containing Emily Carson's favorite sketchbook and a rusted Swiss Army knife with Steve's initials. Tucked between the seats was a faded Polaroid photo, the whole family smiling on the dock, taken just hours before they disappeared. Despite the clues, the inside of the boat was empty. No remains, no clothing, no obvious signs of violence. The only thing that didn't belong was a single muddy shoe wedged behind the driver's seat. It was much too small for Steve or Linda and didn't match anything from the Carson family's belongings. As word spread, old suspicions resurfaced. "Maybe they just drowned," one local muttered. "Or maybe someone didn't want them found." Others recalled how the Carsons had seemed especially nervous in the weeks before their trip, how Steve had mentioned trouble with a customer at the garage, or how Emily had seemed withdrawn at church. Sheriff Malone refused to speculate. "We'll follow the evidence," he told reporters. "We owe the Carsons and this community answers after all these years." The search of the lake resumed, this time with divers and sonar, while detectives combed through cold files and neighborhood rumors. As night fell over Lake Whitney, the boat sat silent under the sheriff's floodlights, casting long shadows on the muddy shore. The town waited for answers, knowing that the mystery of the Carson family might finally be unraveling. And as Sheriff Malone locked the police tape in place and turned away from the water, he couldn't shake the feeling that the truth, whatever it was about to surface at last. The days that followed were a blur of speculation and investigation. The Texas Rangers arrived, bringing fresh eyes to the decades-old mystery. Forensics teams in white suits combed every inch of the battered boat and the muddy stretch of shoreline, searching for even the faintest sign of what happened to the Carson family all those years ago. Sheriff Malone found himself at the center of a media storm. Reporters camped outside his office and the Carson family's old home, looking for any detail that could break the story open. Most of the evidence, however, was frustratingly sparse. The Polaroid photo, waterlogged and faded, showed Steve, Linda, Emily, and their little boy, Tyler, all grinning on the dock, seemingly oblivious to the tragedy that was about to unfold. The red backpack, once vibrant, now smelled of mildew. Inside the sketchbook, a half-finished drawing of the lake was dated the day the family vanished. Emily had written, "Best summer ever," in looping letters beneath a pencil sketch of her father. But the small muddy shoe remained the biggest enigma. Linda's sister, Carol, was brought in to examine the boat and its contents. She confirmed that the shoe didn't belong to either of the Carson children. It was too worn, too unfamiliar, and no one could recall any friend or guest who joined the family that day. As investigators found out, they re-interviewed everyone who'd seen the Carsons before their lake trip. A neighbor remembered Steve loading the boat with fishing gear and coolers that morning. Emily and Tyler, excited, had waved to kids riding their bikes down the street. At the gas station, the attendant recalled Linda buying sodas and sunscreen, chatting about the weather. "Nothing seemed off," he said. "They looked happy." Yet, as detectives dug deeper, they discovered small details that never made sense. The Carsons' mailbox, which hadn't been checked for weeks after their disappearance, still held a stack of unopened letters. A note on the fridge, written in Linda's handwriting, read, "Don't forget to feed the cat." Back on Monday, it was supposed to be just a weekend trip. Then came the call that reignited hope and dread in equal measure. Divers searching a section of Lake Whitney near the old boat launch found something caught in the roots of a sunken cypress tree, a child's bracelet engraved with the name Emily. The bracelet was tangled with a length of nylon rope cut cleanly at both ends. Sheriff Malone stared at the bracelet in his gloved hand, a chill running through him despite the humid Texas air. The find raised more questions than answers. If Emily's bracelet was in the water, had she tried to escape? Had someone else been with them? The town's anxiety grew with each new detail. Candlelight vigils sprang up on the lake shore, and the Carson family's relatives, now scattered across Texas, returned to mineral wells, desperate for closure. The sheriff promised to keep searching, refusing to let the trail go cold again. As another night fell over Lake Whitney, the sheriff stood alone at the shore, staring at the boat. Somewhere out there, he believed, the truth waited, hidden in the murky depths, in the muddy ground, or in memories people hadn't dared to revisit for 11 long years. The next morning, a heavy mist drifted over Lake Whitney as the forensic team returned to the site. Rumors had already spread throughout the region. Locals lined the shore with binoculars, hoping to glimpse the scene, while camera crews huddled in vans, waiting for a statement from the sheriff. The Carsons' boat, battered but stubbornly intact, had become a shrine of unanswered questions. Sheriff Malone paced along the shoreline, reviewing his notes for the 100th time. He replayed the last hours before the disappearance in his mind, the gas station clerk's casual wave, the neighbor's memory of the kid's laughter, the "back on Monday" note. He couldn't shake the feeling that somewhere among these details, the truth was waiting to be found. Detective Angela Watts, assigned from Dallas due to the case's sudden prominence, worked quietly beside the sheriff. She inspected the family's belongings once again, meticulously laying them out on a blue tarp near the water. Each item felt like a time capsule: Emily's sketchbook with her childish doodles, Tyler's favorite action figure, a picnic blanket, a plastic container of sun-bleached Polaroids, and a mysterious muddy shoe. Angela called out, "Sheriff, come look at this." She was pointing at the photo of the Carson family on the dock. At first glance, it was an ordinary picture: Steve with his arm around Linda, the kids hugging their parents, the lake sparkling behind them. But Angela had noticed something strange. Reflected in the glass window of the boathouse behind them, just barely visible, was a blurry silhouette, a tall figure standing apart from the family, watching. Malone's heart quickened. "Did you see this before?" Angela shook her head. "It could be nothing. Maybe a trick of the light or someone walking by, but it's odd." They called in the forensic photographer, who took high-resolution scans and promised to enhance the image. By midday, the sheriff's office was buzzing with theories. Had a stranger been lurking on the dock that day? Could this explain the extra shoe, the cut rope, the vanishing act that had haunted the town for over a decade? Meanwhile, the search for physical evidence expanded. Cadaver dogs swept the muddy banks, occasionally barking at spots where the ground was softer or where roots tangled with debris. Nothing definitive surfaced, but every lead was followed. Divers mapped the lake bed around the cypress tree, searching for more clues. That afternoon, Linda's sister, Carol, joined the investigators on the dock. She studied the photograph and shook her head. No one else was supposed to be there. We all knew each other. Every neighbor. If someone was hanging around, someone would have noticed. Her words only deepened the mystery. The sheriff tried to piece together a timeline. If the Carson family had encountered someone on the dock, a stranger, or perhaps even someone they knew, what happened next? The muddy shoe, the cut rope, the bracelet in the water, and the shadow in the photo all suggested something had gone terribly wrong. As evening approached, the sheriff met with the Carsons' extended family in a church meeting room. They shared memories: Steve's fishing stories, Linda's laughter, Emily's love of drawing, Tyler's habit of collecting bottle caps wherever they traveled. The room grew somber as Carol held up Emily's bracelet, her voice trembling. If Emily tried to get away, maybe she got free. Maybe someone else was involved. I just want to know if they ever stood a chance. Outside, the sheriff's phone buzzed. It was the forensic photographer, his voice urgent. "Sheriff, you need to see this. The figure in the window. It's clearer now. I can't say who it is, but there's definitely someone there. Someone watching the Carsons." Malone stood in the darkening lot, phone pressed to his ear, the weight of 11 years of uncertainty growing heavier with each passing minute. For the first time since the Carson family vanished, he felt they were closer to the truth, closer to an answer that would finally let the town and the family begin to heal. News of the mysterious figure in the Carson family's photographs spread quickly through mineral wells and neighboring towns. For days, residents debated the identity of the shadowy presence on the dock. Some swore it looked like an old fisherman who lived on the lake back then, while others speculated about drifters, disgruntled neighbors, or jealous acquaintances. By the weekend, the town was gripped by a mixture of dread and hope, the same emotions that had defined every conversation about the Carsons for more than a decade. Detective Angela Watts sat hunched over the enhanced photo in the sheriff's office. The outline of the figure was clearer now, broad-shouldered, wearing a cap, and standing so still that he almost blended into the background. Angela blew up the image pixel by pixel, searching for anything familiar, a face, a detail on the jacket, something to spark recognition. Nothing concrete emerged, but the figure's intent posture haunted her. Whoever he was, he hadn't come to fish or chat. He'd been watching. Meanwhile, forensic teams continued to examine every inch of the Carsons' weathered boat. Beneath a bench seat, they found a folded piece of paper, waterlogged and faded, but still legible. It was a list written in Linda Carson's neat hand. Lunch for Sunday: turkey sandwiches, apples, cookies, Tyler's floaties, Emily's sketchbook, sunscreen. The list ended with a simple phrase: call Carol on Monday to check in. The mundane details made the reality of their disappearance feel all the more raw. Out on the dock, Sheriff Malone met with Frank Dillard, the now-retired Lake Patrol officer who'd responded the day the Carsons vanished. Frank ran a hand over his weathered face as he recounted his memories. "I remember seeing some muddy footprints on the far end of the dock, real small ones, like from a kid. But there was a big print, too, fresh, and it didn't match any of the family's shoes we collected for evidence. We all thought it was just a fisherman or a park ranger passing through, but now I'm not so sure." Angela joined them, holding the photo. "Frank, take a look. Does this figure look familiar?" Frank stared at the image for a long moment. "Hard to say. It might be that old guy who lived up at the north end, Tom Abernathy. But he moved away in '87, and everyone said he was harmless. Could be a stranger." Malone frowned. "No one remembers seeing a stranger hanging around." Frank shook his head. "Not that I know of, but people forget, and sometimes people don't want to remember." Back at the forensics lab, the muddy shoe found near the cypress tree yielded a possible breakthrough. Tiny flecks of dark green paint clung to the sole. Investigators traced the paint to a small rowboat painted that same shade, which had been reported stolen from the opposite shore the very week the Carsons vanished. The timeline started to shift. What if someone used the stolen rowboat to approach the family's dock unnoticed? What if they had waited, watched, and then struck? Angela and Malone laid out the new theory at a town hall meeting, hoping for leads. Dozens of townspeople came forward with memories. A man seen walking near the gas station at dawn, an unfamiliar car parked by the old boat launch, a woman who remembered hearing shouting on the water that Sunday night. Most leads faded under scrutiny, but two separate witnesses described seeing a battered green rowboat drifting near the Carson dock that same weekend. No one had ever connected it to the missing family before. The mood in Mineral Wells shifted again, anxiety mixed with anticipation. For the first time in years, it felt as if the truth might finally come to light. Linda's sister, Carol, clutching Emily's recovered bracelet, found herself torn between relief and renewed grief. Whatever happened, she told Angela, someone out there knows. Maybe they've been waiting all these years for someone to finally ask the right questions. That night, as the mist rolled in across Lake Whitney and the town quieted once more, the silhouette in the photograph seemed to linger in every mind, a silent witness to a summer day that had changed everything. And somewhere, perhaps just beyond the reach of memory, an answer waited to be found. Detective Angela woke early the next morning, her mind still turning over every detail from the past week. The photo, the shoe, the paint, all pieces of a puzzle that refused to fit together cleanly. As she drank her coffee and watched the first light glimmer over Lake Whitney, she decided it was time to visit the abandoned cabins near the North Shore, the ones that had come up in so many local rumors. If anyone had used the old cabins for cover or storage, there might be traces left behind, even after all these years. She drove the winding road through mist and wildflowers, past homes where missing Carson family flyers still faded in the windows. At the edge of the woods, she parked and made her way on foot. The cabins, two of them, their roofs sagging, windows dusty and broken, stood hidden behind a screen of sweet gum trees. Angela stepped carefully across the porch, her flashlight illuminating patches of peeling paint and animal tracks. Inside, it smelled of damp earth and mold. She worked methodically, checking floorboards and closets, running her gloved fingers along the ledges. In the second cabin, her beam caught a glint of something metallic wedged behind a loose wall panel. Angela pried the board away, revealing a rusty tackle box. Inside, she found a faded Polaroid photograph, a plastic toy ring, and a set of old car keys. The photo showed two children, a boy and a girl, Tyler and Emily Carson, standing at the edge of the lake, both grinning and holding up fish they'd caught. The sight of their faces, so full of life, sent a jolt of emotion through Angela. The toy ring looked familiar, it matched one in Emily's school portrait from 1986. Carefully, she placed the items in an evidence bag and called Sheriff Malone. Within an hour, the sheriff and a small forensics team arrived, examining every inch of the two cabins. They found remnants of an old sleeping bag, candy wrappers, and a child's flip-flop, size small. All evidence suggested that the cabins had been used, possibly as a hiding place or even a temporary shelter, around the time the Carsons disappeared. Meanwhile, back at the sheriff's office, Linda's sister, Carol, received a phone call she had been dreading and hoping for all at once. The forensics team had completed their preliminary analysis of the bracelet found in the boat. Embedded in the silver were tiny fibers of blue thread, an exact match to the pajamas Emily had been wearing the day she vanished. Carol pressed her hand to her mouth, fighting back tears. "I always knew," she whispered. "That bracelet would bring her back to us one way or another." Angela pieced together the new findings and reviewed the old case files. She built a timeline. The Carsons had arrived at the lake for a day of fishing and swimming with nothing out of the ordinary. Someone, a stranger in a green rowboat or perhaps a familiar face from town, had watched from the dock, waiting for the perfect moment. The family's lunch and belongings were all accounted for. Sometime between 2 o'clock and 4 o'clock in the afternoon, something had happened to drive them away from the dock and into the thick woods. But why would they flee? And where had they gone? And who was the man in the background, so ominously still? Angela's gut told her the answer lay somewhere in the old cabins, maybe in the fragments of conversation overheard at the time. She tracked down an elderly local, Mrs. Thelma Reed, who had lived alone in a cottage near the North Shore in 1986. Mrs. Reed remembered hearing voices in the woods that Sunday, shouting, crying, and a man's voice barking orders, but she'd assumed it was just campers or teenagers trespassing and thought little of it at the time. Angela thanked her and left with a growing sense that the investigation was finally closing in. The old evidence was breathing with new life. As the sun set over Lake Winnie that night, casting the shore in orange and purple, Angela called Carol. "We're closer than we've ever been," she promised. "I think we're about to finally bring your family home." For the first time in 11 years, hope flickered like a candle in the darkness for everyone touched by the Carsons' disappearance. But the truth, she knew, was still hiding in the shadows, waiting to be brought into the light. As dawn broke over Lake Whitney, Angela sat at her desk, surrounded by photographs, maps, and faded witness statements. The lake shimmered with early light beyond the blinds, the same view the Carsons had seen that last morning. Angela's mind replayed every scrap of new evidence, trying to bridge the years of silence with something solid. She was interrupted by a knock. Sheriff Malone, holding a folder thick with printouts and handwritten notes, said, "We pulled more records from the county storage. Turns out, the man seen near the Carson dock in 1986, someone reported his name before. Local fisherman, name's Jack Dobson. Moved out of state in '87, but his family is still around." Angela's pulse quickened. Did he have any connection to the cabins? Malone replied, "His uncle used to own them. We're digging deeper." They called on Jack's younger brother, still living in the area. The man, Paul Dobson, met them on the porch of a weathered farmhouse, his eyes wary but willing. "I remember that summer," Paul said slowly. "Jack was acting strange. After the Carsons went missing, he left town real sudden. Always kept to himself. He used to fish by those cabins, even stayed there some nights." Angela pressed, "Did you ever see him with the Carson family?" Paul shook his head. "Not that I recall, but he did talk about a little girl's bracelet he'd found by the water once. Showed it to me. Silver with blue stones." Angela and Malone exchanged a look. Emily's bracelet, lost the day she vanished. They left with Paul's permission to search his late uncle's property. At the old cabins, forensics uncovered a child's jacket hidden under loose floorboards, its faded tag stitched with the name Tyler. Angela's heart pounded. Each new artifact drew them closer to reconstructing the Carsons' last hours. She drove back to the office, the jacket on the seat beside her, and called Carol. "We found something of Tyler's. We're not giving up." That evening, the team assembled at the sheriff's office, detectives, search and rescue, a forensic analyst, and Carol Carson, her hands trembling as she held the Polaroid of her lost niece and nephew. Angela led them through the timeline: arrival, the lunch by the lake, the encounter with a stranger, the abrupt dash to the woods, and the hidden items in the cabins, the photo, the toy ring, the jacket. Each piece fit together like the slow, stubborn progress of a jigsaw puzzle. "We think the Carsons left the lake in a hurry," Angela explained, "most likely to escape someone or something that frightened them. They took shelter in the abandoned cabins. The evidence shows the kids were there for at least a night, maybe two. But then there's nothing. No footprints, no sightings, only a handful of scattered belongings." One of the search volunteers, an aging local who remembered the original case, spoke up. "My uncle said he saw smoke rising from the cabins the day after the Carsons vanished. Thought maybe squatters or teenagers. If he'd only checked." His voice trailed off. Regret was a common refrain in Lake Whitney. Angela reassured the group, "We can't change the past, but we can keep searching for the truth." That night, she returned home, sat on her porch, and looked across the moonlit water. Her thoughts churned with questions: had Jack Dobson been involved? Had the Carsons tried to return to the lake or fled deeper into the woods? Were there more clues still waiting to be found, hidden in plain sight? As she drifted to sleep, Angela dreamed of the lake, calm and endless, hiding its secrets beneath a layer of mud and memory. She promised herself she would not stop searching, not until every last answer came to light, and the Carsons' story was finally, truly told. By midsummer, Lake Whitney had become the center of the search once again. Angela and Sheriff Malone watched as forensic divers prepared to re-examine the shallow northern inlet, a spot previously ignored because of a tangle of fallen trees and stubborn reeds. It was the only stretch of water the original search teams hadn't fully scoured. "Let's give it one more look," Malone said. "We owe them that much." As divers slipped beneath the surface, Angela walked the overgrown shoreline, replaying the timeline for the 1,000th time. Why would the Carsons abandon their boat? What had scared them enough to leave behind almost everything? The answer felt maddeningly close, like a word on the tip of her tongue. A shout echoed from the water's edge. One of the divers had surfaced, holding up something mud-caked and glinting in the sun, a set of keys, their tags stamped with Carson family boat. Another diver appeared moments later, his hands full of warped, waterlogged Polaroids. Angela's heart leaped. The divers found more: a woman's sandal, a crumpled plastic lunchbox, and, finally, tangled in the roots of a willow tree, a faded blue towel with Emily embroidered in one corner. The discoveries brought new hope and fresh agony to Carol Carson, who came down to the shore as soon as she heard the news. She held the keys in her hands, tears welling in her eyes. "These were in John's jacket pocket that day," she whispered. "They're the only keys we had to the boat." The Polaroids, once cleaned and dried, showed Emily and Tyler posing on the dock, smiling, happy, untouched by the darkness that would follow. Carol clutched them as if they could restore what she'd lost. That evening, Angela pored over the new evidence with the forensics team. The lunchbox contained a note, smeared by water but still legible, scrawled in a child's handwriting: "We are hiding. If you find this, please look for us. We want to go home, Tyler." The weight of those words settled on everyone in the room. The children hadn't been lost at first, they'd been hiding. Malone tapped the table, thinking aloud. So they got away. From what? Angela replied, or from who? The mention of Jack Dobson returned like a shadow. Had he chased them? Did he know where they were hiding? Or had he simply stumbled across the boat and taken their things? They reviewed the evidence from the abandoned cabins. The jacket, the bracelet, the lunchbox, all had been found scattered across the property. The team realized that if the Carsons had hidden there, they must have tried to return to the lake but never made it. Maybe, Angela thought, they had come back to retrieve the boat, hoping to escape, but were prevented somehow by fear, by exhaustion, or by someone blocking their path. As the sun set, Angela walked the shoreline one last time, the blue towel folded over her arm. She knelt near the willow tree where it was found, imagining Emily clutching it, the family huddled together, whispering their hopes into the reeds. She promised quietly, "I will keep looking. I won't give up." That night, the news of the recovered items swept through Lake Whitney, stirring old pain and fresh hope. People left flowers on the Carsons' old dock. A candlelight vigil formed along the water, a line of flickering flames stretching into the darkness. Angela stood among them, humbled by the community's resolve. The next morning, as she sifted through the Polaroids, Angela noticed something she hadn't before, a blurred figure in the background of one photo, standing in the trees, half hidden. Her heart skipped. Was this the clue they'd missed all along? Or just another shadow in a story already too full of them? She knew the answer lay somewhere out there, waiting, and she was more determined than ever to bring it to light. Angela barely slept that night, her mind haunted by the blurry silhouette in the background of the old Polaroid. At sunrise, she pinned the photo under a magnifier and studied every detail, the way the figure's head turned toward the camera, the outline of what looked like a cap, the suggestion of a jacket with wide shoulders. The trees and brush behind the Carsons were unmistakably from the cabins on the north bank. Whoever had been there with them was watching and not part of the family. She took the image to Sheriff Malone. "That's not John, and it's not Carol," Angela said, voice tense. "And the kids never mentioned anyone else being there." Malone rubbed his chin, thoughtful. "Jack Dobson used to wear an old baseball cap like that. Could be him, but after all these years, it's hard to tell." Angela's next move was to find Dobson if he was still living nearby. She started at the local bait shop where he used to hang around. The old shopkeeper remembered him, said Jack had sold his house in the early 90s and moved out west after a string of petty thefts and the day the Carsons vanished. He said people were looking at him funny after those kids disappeared. Claimed he had nothing to do with it, but who knows. Jack always had a knack for being in the wrong place at the wrong time. Unable to track Dobson further, Angela turned back to the evidence. The forensics lab confirmed the lunchbox and towel had traces of DNA matching Emily and Tyler. More importantly, a faint bloody fingerprint on the towel matched none of the Carsons nor the database of known felons. It was a dead end, and yet not quite, it meant a stranger had handled their belongings. Angela's obsession with the case began to draw notice. Some in the sheriff's office thought she was grasping at ghosts, but others, especially Carol, clung to her persistence as their last hope. On her days off, Angela drove every back road near Lake Whitney, searching for old cabins, overgrown trails, places someone might have kept a frightened family out of sight for weeks or months. Then, late one afternoon, she got a call from a man who claimed his father had been the caretaker for a cluster of hunting cabins up the lake. He remembered, as a kid, seeing two children playing in the woods the summer the Carsons vanished. They weren't locals. "I remember because the girl had a blue towel, and the boy carried a red lunchbox," he said. "My dad told me not to talk to them, that their daddy was fixing something in one of the cabins." Angela's hands trembled as she wrote it all down. "Did you ever see their parents?" she asked. "No, ma'am. Just the kids. After a couple weeks, they were gone. I always wondered if I'd imagined it." Angela visited the property. The cabins had been bulldozed long ago, the land grown thick with mesquite. Still, she searched the underbrush and eventually found a patch of bare earth. Kneeling, she brushed away the leaves and found, half buried in the dirt, a small plastic barrette, faded pink, just like Emily used to wear. The find electrified the investigation. News crews returned to Lake Whitney, and Angela was flooded with new calls. An elderly woman recalled seeing a battered station wagon by the lake the day the Carsons vanished. A retired gas station attendant produced a credit card slip from 1986 with John Carson's signature, dated 2 days after the family disappeared. Piece by piece, Angela assembled a new timeline. The Carsons had survived the first night, found shelter in an abandoned cabin, and tried to signal for help. Someone else had been there, someone who left behind a fingerprint and frightened the children into hiding. But where had the family gone? And what had become of their boat, buried in the mud for all those years? Angela felt the answer closing in, as if the whole story were waiting to break through the surface, just like the boat had done when the mud finally gave way. In the following days, the story of the missing Carsons spread like wildfire across Texas. Old theories resurfaced, and amateur sleuths pored over the newly uncovered clues online. Some believed the family had met a tragic end right away, while others, fueled by Angela's discoveries, insisted they'd survived longer than anyone thought. Meanwhile, Angela pressed forward, combing through every new tip with the same relentless determination. She paid a visit to the small archive at the Whitney County Courthouse, searching property records for the hunting cabins where the children had last been seen. The cabins had changed ownership several times in the late 80s, the paperwork a tangle of deeds and liens. The last recorded owner before demolition was a real estate company in Dallas, no obvious connection to the Carsons or their known acquaintances. Frustrated, Angela photographed the documents and spent her evenings piecing together a timeline, cross-referencing with any police reports, missing persons files, or 911 calls from the weeks after the disappearance. Meanwhile, Carol, John's sister, took it upon herself to revisit the surviving relatives and old friends who had stayed silent for years. She spent long afternoons with John's elderly mother, hoping for a memory, a letter, any overlooked scrap that might offer insight. One day, buried in a shoebox at the back of a closet, they found a faded postcard postmarked July 1986, just weeks after the family vanished. The writing on the back was unmistakably Emily's, "Saw fireflies tonight. Miss you, Grandma. Love them." The return address was smudged and illegible, but the card was mailed from a small town in western Oklahoma, nearly 250 miles from Lake Whitney. Angela's heart pounded when she held the card in her hands. If they made it that far, someone must have helped them or forced them. She quickly contacted local authorities in the Oklahoma town, but decades had passed, and no witnesses recalled anything unusual. Still, the postmark was proof that at least one family member had survived for days, maybe weeks, after the supposed drowning. Angela refocused her efforts on tracking the station wagon. It had belonged to Jack Dobson's cousin, who had reported it stolen that summer. When the car was eventually recovered, abandoned on a rural road in Kansas, no fingerprints were found, but the vehicle was filled with old camping gear, children's clothes, and a single shoe, size 3, like Emily's. The trail seemed to end there until a new piece of evidence emerged. A construction crew working on the edge of Lake Whitney unearthed a rusted old toolbox just 50 yards from where the Carsons' boat had been found. Inside, beneath a layer of silt and debris, was a moldy spiral notebook. The front page was water-damaged, but Angela could make out the handwriting, June 18, 1986. "If anyone finds this, please let my family know we're alive. John C." The entries, sporadic and desperate, chronicled the days after the family disappeared, their struggle to find shelter, their hope for rescue, and their fear of the stranger in the woods who seemed to be watching them. The last entry was dated 3 weeks after the disappearance. "We hear footsteps at night. Emily is scared. I pray someone finds us soon." Angela wiped tears from her eyes as she read the final page. The evidence pointed to one chilling conclusion: the Carsons had survived for weeks, evading whoever was stalking them. But after that final entry, there was nothing, no more postcards, no more clues, just silence. Now, with each new discovery, Angela felt the weight of their story growing heavier. The truth seemed agonizingly close, but the final piece remained just out of reach, buried somewhere in the past, waiting to be brought into the light. The discovery of the notebook was headline news across the region. For the first time in over a decade, people saw the Carsons not as a distant, tragic mystery, but as a family who had fought desperately to survive. Angela couldn't stop thinking about the entries. She imagined John writing by flashlight, his wife and daughters huddled close in the darkness, the terror of every unknown sound in the woods. The part about the stranger in the woods sent chills down her spine. Was it a hunter, a local, or someone with a darker purpose? The more she read, the more convinced she became that someone had been following the Carsons, someone who might have known the lake and its back roads better than anyone. She began to focus on local reports from the summer of 1986, searching for mentions of suspicious individuals or trespassers near the lake. One name appeared more than once: Clyde Tatum, a reclusive former ranch hand who had lived in an old trailer deep in the woods, barely a mile from where the toolbox was found. He'd been questioned in the early days of the investigation, but there had never been enough evidence to pursue him further. Angela drove to the address listed in the old police report, finding the trailer long abandoned and overtaken by brush, but she took photos and searched the ground for anything that might have been overlooked. In the crumbling remains of a stone fire pit, she found something, a charred button, half melted, but just visible beneath the ashes. It matched the missing buttons from one of the jackets recovered from the Carsons' boat. Angela brought the find to the county sheriff, who agreed to re-examine the site with a forensic team. Digging beneath the fire pit stones, they uncovered the remnants of a child's backpack, a pair of melted plastic hair barrettes, and, heartbreakingly, a handful of colored pencils, each marked with Emily's initials. No human remains were found, but the evidence was enough to convince investigators to take a fresh look at Clyde Tatum. He had vanished from the area just weeks after the Carsons disappeared, leaving no forwarding address. Meanwhile, Angela revisited interviews with locals who had known Tatum. A few remembered his odd hours and strange habits, his hostility to outsiders, and the way he'd once spoken about those people from the city who think they own the lake. One neighbor recalled seeing a muddy, beat-up pickup near the old logging trail the day after the Carsons vanished, a truck matching Tatum's. With mounting evidence, authorities released a statement requesting information on Tatum's whereabouts. For weeks, nothing surfaced. Angela pored over every scrap of data, refusing to give up. Then, just as the investigation seemed to stall, she received a letter in the mail, postmarked from northern Arkansas. The handwriting was shaky, but the message was clear: I have information about what happened at Lake Whitney. Please come alone. There was no signature, but inside was a photograph, an old faded image of the Carsons' boat, half submerged in the reeds, and standing in the background, a shadowy figure with the unmistakable profile of Clyde Tatum. Angela knew this was her chance. She packed her bag, notified the sheriff, and prepared for the journey that could finally uncover the Carsons' fate. The answers were closer than ever, but so was the danger. Angela drove through the winding Ozark roads with her heart pounding in her chest, the photo from the anonymous letter propped on the dashboard beside her. It felt surreal. She'd spent years hunting dead ends, and now she was heading straight into the heart of the last true mystery. As the sun began to set behind the hills, she pulled off at the tiny post office listed in the return address, just outside the town of Jasper, Arkansas. The air was thick with humidity and the chirr of cicadas, and every sound seemed charged with meaning. She parked and scanned the parking lot for anyone matching the blurred outline from the photograph, but the area was deserted except for an old woman retrieving her mail. Angela's phone buzzed, a blocked number, a text: go to the diner across the street. Ask for apple pie. Every detail felt like something out of a movie, but she followed instructions. Crossing the street to a neon-lit diner where a handful of truckers nursed their coffee at the counter, Angela ordered apple pie, her nerves almost frayed, and was quietly told by the waitress to wait in booth 7. She sat, fidgeting with her bag, until an old man in worn jeans and a faded cap slid in across from her. His eyes, sharp and haunted, studied her face for a long moment before he spoke. "You're the reporter from Texas," he rasped. "I knew you'd come. Knew someone would someday." Angela nodded, her voice steady. "You said you know about the Carsons." The old man, introducing himself only as Ed, nodded, lowering his voice. "I knew Clyde Tatum back then. He worked the night shift at the mill with me. Used to talk about that family, the ones who disappeared. Said folks like them never lasted long up here." Angela pulled out the photo. "Did you take this? Are you saying you saw him with the Carsons' boat?" Ed's hands trembled slightly as he sipped his coffee. "Not me, no. But I saw Tatum coming back from the lake that night, covered in mud, wild-eyed. Next morning, there was a busted tail light in the parking lot. I told the sheriff, but nobody listened. Didn't want to cross Tatum." Angela pressed for more, and Ed's story spilled out, how Tatum boasted about making city folk respect the land, how he kept trophies from people he'd taught a lesson, how years later Ed had found the old photo in a box of Tatum's junk after Tatum skipped town, afraid of being blamed if he came forward. Ed had held on to it all this time, waiting for someone to care enough to chase the truth. With the photo in hand and Ed's testimony, Angela returned to Texas, delivering the evidence to authorities. The sheriff's office coordinated with Arkansas law enforcement, launching a search for Tatum, who was now in his 70s and likely living under a false name. Days later, they got the break they needed. A routine traffic stop caught Tatum outside Little Rock. With the mounting evidence, including the personal items burned in his old fire pit and Ed's statement, Tatum finally broke after hours of interrogation. He admitted he'd found the Carsons stranded and terrified near his trailer but insisted he only meant to scare them off, that things had gotten out of hand. In the struggle, he separated the family. John Carson died in an accident on the property, and Tatum, terrified, buried his body and abandoned the surviving mother and daughters deep in the woods. Angela listened to the confession, heart pounding. There was one final hope. Tatum, facing life in prison, agreed to lead authorities to the spot. Angela joined the search party as they combed the dense woods north of Lake Whitney. It was there, under a pile of rotted timbers, they found an old storm cellar. Inside, a faded blanket and the initials CC etched in the wood. DNA later confirmed that, miraculously, the girls had survived for weeks, even months, before being rescued by an unknown woman who never came forward. The final truth was messy, tragic, and yet full of unexpected moments of hope. Angela's reporting gave the Carsons' surviving relatives the closure they'd longed for. And for Angela, the story that had haunted her for more than a decade finally had an ending, one written in courage, grief, and the stubborn light of family love. The truth behind the Carson family's disappearance finally began to unravel in front of a stunned nation. News outlets descended on Lake Whitney and the Ozarks, broadcasting updates every hour. Angela became the face of the investigation, her reporting giving voice to a family whose story had become an unsolved American legend. Across Texas, people who remembered the case from their childhood watched in disbelief as new details emerged about that fateful weekend in 1986 and the years that followed. After Clyde Tatum's confession and the discovery of the storm cellar, forensic teams moved in. The space was cramped, musty, and eerily preserved, a makeshift shelter that had kept the Carson girls alive far longer than anyone imagined. They found initials, a calendar scratched into the wall, and remnants of canned food, some dated from the late 1980s. Investigators pieced together a harrowing timeline. After the initial tragedy, Tatum, fearful and overwhelmed, abandoned the girls and their injured mother in the woods. As days turned to weeks, the Carsons survived by scavenging and keeping each other warm. But their mother's injuries became critical. In a stroke of fate, a reclusive woman living off-grid, later identified as a local named Eloise Parker, found the girls by chance while foraging. She cared for them as best she could, keeping them hidden from authorities out of deep distrust for outsiders, shaped by her own troubled past. By the time Eloise fell ill and died suddenly 2 years later, the girls, still using assumed names, were old enough to slip away, blending into society and never revealing the truth of who they really were. The world had believed them dead, but records and interviews with people who met them in the early 1990s confirmed their identities. Angela's search for the sisters became its own chapter. Using details from Eloise's abandoned cabin, old photographs, scraps of clothing, handwritten notes, Angela tracked down a woman living in rural Oklahoma who matched the younger Carson daughter's age and description. When Angela visited, the woman greeted her at the door, eyes wide with disbelief as Angela explained why she'd come. "I thought no one would ever find us," the woman whispered, tears brimming. "We never wanted to disappear. We just didn't know how to come home." Angela gently explained that their family had never stopped searching, that even after so many years, their story still mattered. In the weeks that followed, the two Carson sisters were finally reunited with relatives in Texas. The emotional homecoming was captured in grainy home videos and newspaper photos. Two women, battered by life but resilient, returning to a world that had long mourned them. The media's focus soon shifted from Tatum's crimes to the power of hope and endurance. Angela's articles didn't shy away from the pain and complexity but celebrated the sisters' survival and the small acts of kindness that made it possible. The authorities who had failed to solve the case faced tough questions, but the public found solace in the idea that even in the darkest circumstances, family bonds could endure. At Lake Whitney, a modest memorial was erected near the site where the Carsons' boat was found, honoring both the family's ordeal and the perseverance of everyone who had searched for answers. Angela stood with the surviving sisters as they placed flowers beside the marker, the sun setting over the water, a quiet, dignified end to years of mystery and loss. Angela's own life changed, too. The Carson case opened doors for her career, but more importantly, it restored her belief in the value of truth and the tenacity of love. In a quiet moment by the lake, Angela promised herself she'd keep telling stories like this, stories that mattered, not just because they were unsolved, but because they were human. With the truth now revealed, the Carson story became the subject of national debate, both as a cautionary tale and as a symbol of resilience. Angela's reporting led to renewed calls for better child welfare systems, improved search and rescue procedures, and increased resources for missing persons cases. Her name began to appear in national bylines, but she never let go of the humility that had brought her to Lake Whitney in the first place. To her, it was always about the people, never the headlines. In the weeks that followed the reunion, Angela spent time with the Carson sisters as they slowly began to rebuild their lives. The trauma of what they had endured would never fully fade, yet with each passing day, there were small signs of healing. Family members, some of whom had believed the girls were long dead, welcomed them back with open arms and tearful embraces. The sisters shared memories, some painful, some cherished, and gradually learned to trust again. Angela was present for those first family dinners, witnessing laughter mixed with tears as they recounted stories of their parents, their childhood, and the years lost to fear and uncertainty. She documented their journey with respect and care, careful never to overstep, knowing that the real victory was not in the telling, but in the living. Authorities concluded their investigation with a lengthy report that detailed not only the crimes and failures but also the extraordinary survival of the sisters. Clyde Tatum was prosecuted to the fullest extent of the law, his confession and the physical evidence enough to guarantee a life sentence. The discovery of Eloise Parker's role prompted a re-evaluation of her legacy, not as a criminal, but as a deeply troubled woman who ultimately saved two young lives. As autumn came to Texas, Angela reflected on the arc of the story, from tragedy to revelation, from despair to reunion. She wrote one final piece, published in newspapers across the country. It ended like this: in the end, the Carsons were not lost. They were waiting to be found, not only by the world, but by each other. Sometimes the answers to life's hardest mysteries are closer than we dare imagine, hidden not in the depths of a lake, but in the strength we find to keep searching. The Carsons' journey reminds us that even when the world turns dark, hope can endure. And that, perhaps, is the greatest story of all. Angela folded her notebook and, for the first time in years, allowed herself to simply stand by the lake, the gentle breeze on her face. She knew there would always be other stories, other mysteries, other families searching for answers. But for now, she allowed herself a rare moment of peace, content in the knowledge that this story, at least, had found its ending. The winter after the Carson sisters returned to the world was the quietest Lake Whitney had seen in years. The community, once haunted by rumors and heartache, slowly settled into a new rhythm, one shaped by hope, healing, and remembrance. Angela Hayes, whose reporting had helped drive the investigation to its long-delayed conclusion, remained in close contact with the sisters, never exploiting their pain, always honoring their privacy. Word of the case spread far beyond the small Texas town. Across the state, schools and police departments updated missing persons protocols, and local news stations aired segments on the importance of never giving up, on loved ones, on cold cases, or on the idea that answers could still be out there waiting to be unearthed. The Carsons' house, long empty, became a site of community support. Neighbors stopped by with homemade food and offers to help repair what the years had worn down. Angela covered the story of the home's transformation, focusing on how people banded together, not out of pity, but out of respect. Some evenings, the porch was alive with gentle conversation, music, and the sound of children, nieces, nephews, and new cousins, running up and down the wooden steps. Maddie and Lily Carson adjusted in their own ways. Maddie spent long hours writing, at first in journals, then in essays she shared with Angela, who encouraged her to publish her reflections. Her words, raw but hopeful, touched a wide audience. Lily took to gardening, finding comfort in nurturing fragile sprouts into bloom. The garden became a metaphor for her own recovery, a quiet promise that growth could return even after the coldest winter. The authorities, closing their file, issued a public statement, "Let this case be a reminder, every missing person is someone's family. Every unanswered question deserves to be asked again." In early spring, the sisters held a private memorial at the lake shore, honoring their parents and the years lost. Angela was invited but stayed at a respectful distance, observing the sisters as they released paper lanterns onto the water, the glowing lights reflecting their memories, their grief, and their resilience. The final article Angela published on the Carson story ended not with a dramatic reveal, but with an image, a family fractured by tragedy and time, choosing to walk forward together. Lake Whitney, once a place of loss, now a symbol of return. And for those who read the story, whether in Texas or beyond, it served as a gentle reminder, even the deepest mysteries can be solved. And even after the longest night, dawn still comes. Spring brought new beginnings to Lake Whitney, but the shadow of the Carson family's ordeal lingered gently over the community. The local church organized a benefit concert for missing persons, with Maddie and Lily invited as honored guests. Maddie hesitated at first, public appearances still triggered her anxiety, but Lily persuaded her, reminding her that their story might help others who felt forgotten or lost. The event drew a crowd from neighboring towns, some there to support the Carsons, others to draw hope for their own missing loved ones. The girls sat quietly in the front row as survivors, advocates, and families of the missing shared their stories. When Maddie was finally introduced, she spoke with a trembling voice that grew stronger as she told her family's truth, not just of being taken, but of the long journey home, the strength she found in her sister, and the small acts of kindness that sustained her through the worst days. Afterward, as people came to thank them, Maddie realized that while her pain might never completely fade, it could be transformed into something useful, a way to comfort others, to offer solidarity, to say, "You're not alone." Lily, meanwhile, quietly comforted a mother who had not seen her son in a decade, pressing a wildflower from her garden into the woman's hand as a silent symbol of hope. Meanwhile, Angela's articles about the Carson story inspired renewed interest in other cold cases. A detective from Fort Worth reached out, asking Maddie and Lily if they remembered any details about other missing children from the time they were held. Their answers, fragmented memories of names, faces, and fleeting conversations, sparked a new line of inquiry, leading to fresh leads in several cases that had been dormant for years. The Carsons' ordeal, it seemed, had not just changed their own lives but was sending ripples outward, affecting strangers they would never meet. The sisters began to heal in their own ways. Maddie enrolled in college courses, working toward a degree in psychology, determined to help others survive and recover from trauma. Lily took a part-time job at a florist shop, her calm presence and steady hands quickly earning her the trust of her boss and customers. They visited the lake shore often, sometimes sitting in silence, sometimes speaking softly about the past and the uncertain but hopeful future. The town of Lake Whitney moved forward. 2 missing person posters on the bulletin board at the gas station were no longer ignored. People paid attention, stopped to read, and took copies home. The sheriff, whose tenacity helped crack the case, became a quiet hero in the community, but he always deflected praise back to the Carsons and the neighbors who refused to let the story go cold. One afternoon, as the sisters tended their small garden, Maddie glanced up at the sky, brilliant blue, just as it had been the day they vanished. For the first time in years, she felt a sense of peace settle over her. The lake, the town, and the people she loved were still there, waiting for her to reclaim them. And in that moment, she realized that surviving wasn't just about endurance, it was about finding new ways to live, to give back, and to believe in brighter days ahead. The 11th anniversary of the Carson family's disappearance arrived in the middle of a gentle Texas summer. Lake Whitney shimmered under a cloudless sky, the cicadas humming in the trees, life going on around a community forever marked by one family's tragedy and resilience. The Carsons had planned something quiet for the day, just Maddie, Lily, their father, and a handful of close friends gathering at the lake shore where the ordeal began and ended. There was no ceremony, no speeches, just a picnic lunch and the comfort of being together. Lily spread a blanket near the wildflowers while Maddie unpacked sandwiches, their father pouring lemonade into paper cups. For a few hours, they simply existed, no cameras, no reporters, no reminders of what had been lost. Later, as the sun began to dip behind the trees, Maddie stood at the water's edge, the muddy shore cool beneath her bare feet. She remembered how it felt to be afraid, to think they would never come home, and she let herself acknowledge the strength it took to keep going. Beside her, Lily tossed a flat stone into the lake, watching it skip across the surface, each bounce a small act of defiance against the weight of memory. Their father joined them, his arms gently wrapped around both daughters. For a long while, the three watched the sun slip lower, each of them thinking their own thoughts, bound together by what they had survived and the new life they had built. In the months that followed, Maddie and Lily made it their mission to support other families with missing loved ones, connecting with support groups, fundraising for search efforts, and speaking at schools about safety and hope. Maddie started a journal that would one day become a memoir. Lily began painting again, her canvases filled with lakes, wildflowers, and small glimpses of the quiet heroism she had found in herself. Lake Whitney itself became a symbol, no longer of loss, but of return. Tourists came, drawn by stories of the sisters who survived, but the locals guarded the Carsons' privacy, gently reminding outsiders that not every story needed to be retold. Years passed, but the bond between the sisters only grew stronger. Their father remarried, and the family expanded, new laughter filling the home that once echoed with worry and grief. At every milestone, birthdays, graduations, quiet afternoons on the porch, the Carsons remembered not just what they had lost, but all they had regained. And sometimes, late at night, Maddie would stand on the back porch, listening to the night birds and the breeze off the lake. She would close her eyes, breathe deep, and give silent thanks for second chances. The world would always hold mysteries, some terrifying, some beautiful. But for the Carson family, hope had found its way home at last.